She whispered, "You're too young to know this, until tonight." And just like that, everything I thought I knew about her, and myself, changed. The evening had begun like any other, quiet, familiar, and unremarkable. I had gone over to help my friend with some last-minute work in his apartment, expecting nothing more than casual chatter and the hum of mundane tasks. But the moment I stepped inside, I noticed her. His mother. She was moving through the kitchen with an effortless grace, humming softly to herself, and somehow, just being there, she made the ordinary feel different. She was in her early 40s, poised and confident, yet there was a softness in her movements, a subtle vulnerability in the way she lingered over a countertop or adjusted a vase on the shelf. The warm yellow light of the kitchen accentuated the gentle curve of her hair and the faint sparkle in her eyes when she caught my glance. For a moment, I froze, captivated by the quiet authority she exuded, not demanding, but undeniably present. "You're too young to know this, until tonight," she whispered, almost conspiratorially, as she handed me a cup of steaming tea. Her voice was soft, melodic, and it brushed against my consciousness like a delicate caress. I blinked, unsure whether I had heard correctly, but the weight of her gaze, calm yet filled with an unspoken challenge, left me rooted in place. The tea was warm in my hands, the steam curling and rising in the cool kitchen air, carrying with it the subtle scent of vanilla and something floral, almost like the trace of a memory. When our fingers brushed as I accepted the cup, the contact was brief, accidental, yet electric. A fleeting warmth traveled up my arm, and I felt a strange, fluttering awareness of her presence that had nothing to do with familiarity. We moved in tandem around the kitchen, our movements casual yet inherently synchronized. She laughed at something small, a slip of a utensil, a joke my friend had made earlier, and the sound was gentle, tinged with warmth that seemed to wrap around me. Even without fully understanding why, I found myself leaning slightly closer, drawn into a quiet orbit around her. Her eyes, calm and knowing, seemed to measure me in ways I wasn't ready to articulate. There was no outright flirtation, no provocation, just the subtle, magnetic pull of someone who sees more of you than you usually let anyone see. And in that shared silence, that soft exchange of glances and touches, I realized that tonight would be different. Something unspoken had begun to thread its way between us, delicate, intoxicating, and entirely unexpected. It wasn't just curiosity. It wasn't just admiration. It was the first whisper of a connection that promised complexity, warmth, and tension in equal measure. And for the first time that evening, I felt both excited and a little unsteady, aware that something was quietly, almost dangerously, starting to unfold. After the initial, almost electric encounter in the kitchen, the evening seemed to settle into an easy rhythm. My friend had disappeared into his room to finish some work, leaving the two of us alone. The soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic outside created a quiet cocoon, one that felt oddly intimate. She leaned against the counter, arms folded loosely, her posture relaxed yet inherently graceful. "So, what kind of music do you actually listen to?" she asked, tilting her head slightly, eyes curious but warm. I hesitated for a moment, fumbling for words, and she chuckled, a soft, melodious sound that somehow made the room feel smaller, closer. We began to talk, first about music, then books, and finally life itself. Her words carried experience, a perspective shaped by years I hadn't yet lived, and yet she spoke in a way that was inclusive, not condescending. Each laugh, each shared memory, felt like threads weaving an invisible tapestry between us. Occasionally, our hands would brush, when passing a book, when reaching for a cup, and each accidental touch lingered just a fraction longer than it needed to. At one point, she reached over to rest her hand lightly on my shoulder while laughing at a joke I made. The warmth of her skin against mine sent a small, undeniable jolt through me. My pulse quickened, but her touch was steady, comforting, not teasing, a delicate contradiction that left me both exhilarated and unsteady. Her eyes met mine in those moments, and I caught a flicker of something unreadable, curiosity, amusement, maybe even recognition of the unspoken tension building between us. The conversation ebbed and flowed naturally, punctuated by comfortable silences. I noticed the subtle details, the gentle sway of her hair as she shifted, the soft scent of vanilla and cinnamon lingering in the air, the faint tremor in her laugh when she let herself relax. Every small gesture, every shared glance, seemed loaded with meaning, though neither of us spoke it aloud. For the first time that evening, I felt a quiet sense of belonging in her presence, not as a friend's younger companion, not as an intruder in her home, but as someone she seemed to notice in a way that felt personal, almost private. It was a delicate balance of admiration and hesitation, a mutual awareness of the invisible line we were tiptoeing along. As the evening stretched on, I realized the night had already begun to change me. Something about being here, sharing these simple moments, had opened a door I didn't know existed. And though nothing had been said explicitly, the air between us thrummed with possibility, an unspoken promise that this connection was only just beginning to unfold. The night had deepened, and with it, the rhythm of our conversation shifted. Earlier laughter gave way to quieter tones, softer words that felt heavier with meaning. She had poured us each another cup of tea, and I noticed the care in the way she placed the cup before me, fingertips brushing the rim, deliberate yet gentle. For a moment, we sat in silence, the faint clink of the spoon against the porcelain the only sound. Then, almost hesitantly, she began to speak about something more personal, a struggle she had faced recently, a loss that still weighed quietly on her heart. Her voice was calm, controlled, but I could sense the vulnerability she rarely showed to anyone. It wasn't dramatic or self-pitying, it was quiet, honest, and profoundly human. I listened, my attention fully captured. Every word she shared felt like a small window opening into her world, a world shaped by experiences I hadn't lived yet. I realized that this was more than casual conversation, she was trusting me with fragments of herself that she kept hidden from most people. And in that trust, a subtle bond began to form, delicate but unbreakable. At one point, her hand reached out, brushing mine lightly as if seeking reassurance, or perhaps offering it. The brief contact was electric, warm and grounding at once. Her skin was soft, familiar yet undeniably distant, a contrast to my own tentative nervousness. The gentle pressure of her hand lingered, and I felt my heart beat faster, not out of lust, but from the intensity of connection, the realization that someone of such confidence and poise had chosen to confide in me. Her eyes held mine, steady but soft, and I found myself wanting to convey the depth of my attention without words. The room seemed smaller, the dim light warmer, every shadow and flicker of candlelight accentuating the intimacy of the moment. It wasn't about romance in the overt sense, it was about recognition, the quiet acknowledgement that, for the first time, our worlds were intersecting in a way that mattered. I noticed the little things, the faint tremor of her fingers, the way her shoulders softened when she allowed herself to speak freely, the subtle scent of her perfume that lingered in the space between us. Each detail imprinted itself on me, building an unspoken narrative that neither of us needed to define yet. By the time she finished speaking, the air was thick with understanding. Neither of us pushed the moment away, instead, we let it breathe, lingering in a space that was fragile, charged, and deeply human. In the quiet aftermath, I realized that this evening had already shifted something fundamental. Our connection was no longer casual, it was meaningful, intimate in a way that transcended age, expectation, or convention. And though nothing had been said aloud, the unspoken promise of emotional closeness hovered palpably between us. After the evening's earlier intensity, the atmosphere in the apartment shifted in a way that felt lighter, yet charged with a new, unspoken energy. My friend had finally retreated to his room, leaving us in the quiet hum of the living room. She settled onto the sofa with effortless ease, and I followed, finding myself acutely aware of the space between us, the way our shoulders nearly brushed, the warmth radiating from her presence. The conversation began casually, a debate over trivial matters, which movie was truly a classic, whose taste in music was better, or which book deserved more praise. But the tension of the earlier intimacy lingered, turning even these small disagreements into something playful, teasing, and slightly electrifying. "You really think that's better than this?" she said, raising an eyebrow, a faint, knowing smile playing at her lips. Her tone was light, teasing, yet there was a subtle challenge in it, as if testing not just my knowledge, but my reaction. I couldn't resist responding in kind, my voice carrying a mock indignation I didn't entirely feel. Absolutely. You just don't get it yet. Her laughter rang through the room, soft and warm, vibrating in a way that made the hair on my arms stand on end. Then, almost without thinking, she nudged me lightly with her elbow, a playful gesture that sent a shiver down my spine. The contact was brief but deliberate enough to linger in my consciousness. As the debate continued, small gestures, brushing past each other to reach the same book, leaning closer to whisper a point, became charged with meaning. Every accidental touch felt deliberate, every shared glance held the weight of unspoken acknowledgement. There was a magnetic pull between us, subtle yet undeniable, threading through the laughter and casual banter. I found myself noticing details I hadn't before, the gentle sway of her hair as she gestured, the warmth of her arm when it grazed mine, the faint scent of her perfume that clung to the air long after she moved. And yet, the evening remained light-hearted, playful, nothing had to be said aloud for the tension to hum quietly beneath the surface. At one point, she leaned back, pretending to surrender the argument, but her eyes sparkled with mischief, and I felt my pulse quicken. It was the kind of closeness that balanced laughter with anticipation, teasing with tenderness, a dance neither of us wanted to end. By the time the debate wound down, the room felt smaller, more intimate, as if the playful friction had drawn us closer not just physically, but emotionally. There was an unspoken agreement lingering in the air, the night was far from over, and whatever was unfolding between us was only gaining momentum, slow-burning and impossible to ignore. The playful energy of the evening had settled into a quieter, more intimate rhythm. We moved together into the living room, still talking, still laughing softly, yet the air had changed. There was an almost imperceptible gravity drawing us closer, the kind that makes even small gestures feel weighted with significance. She paused by a low bookshelf, her hand brushing over the spines of books with delicate care. "I want to show you something," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper, the kind that makes you lean in without thinking. There was an invitation in her tone, gentle but compelling, as if she were opening a door to a part of her life few people had ever seen. I followed, heart quietly racing, aware of the subtle tension that had been threading between us since the night began. Her presence was enveloping, the warmth of her body nearby a comforting yet thrilling contrast to the nervous anticipation thrumming through me. She pulled out a small, worn photo album, its cover soft under her fingers. "These are just memories," she murmured, handing it to me. Her fingers brushed mine, and the contact lingered a fraction longer than necessary. I felt a warmth spread from the point of contact, a quiet awareness of her closeness that made my chest tighten with anticipation. As I flipped through the pages, she leaned beside me, her shoulder lightly grazing mine. Each photo she spoke of carried a story, a memory she had entrusted to me in her own quiet way. Her voice was low and intimate, carrying a resonance that seemed to vibrate through the air between us. I noticed the softness of her hair against her neck, the subtle scent of her perfume mingling with the warmth of the room, creating a sensory closeness that was both thrilling and grounding. At one point, she glanced at me, her eyes holding a flicker of something unspoken, trust, curiosity, perhaps even the faintest recognition of the connection we were building. Her hand rested near mine on the album, and I caught myself wishing it would stay there a moment longer. There was an unspoken tension, a silent acknowledgement that we were navigating boundaries neither of us wanted to define aloud yet. Every movement, every whisper, every shared smile seemed deliberate, and yet effortless. Her laughter, low and musical, contrasted with the quiet intensity of her gaze, and I realized how entirely she commanded the space around her, not through words, but through presence. By the time she closed the album, the air between us hummed with quiet electricity. The whispered invitation had done more than show me memories, it had drawn us closer, deepening the slow-burn tension in ways neither of us could ignore. The night felt suspended, fragile yet intensely alive, and I understood, with a mix of excitement and restraint, that everything had shifted. Something meaningful had begun, and there was no turning back from the quiet intimacy we now shared. The room had grown quieter, the night deepening outside with only the faint hum of distant traffic and the occasional creak of the apartment settling. After showing me the photo album, she didn't speak immediately. Instead, she sank into the sofa, and I hesitated before sitting across from her. The space between us felt charged, not with urgency, but with a deliberate, simmering awareness. For several minutes, neither of us said a word. Our silence wasn't uncomfortable, it was laden with recognition, the kind that makes your chest feel simultaneously heavy and light. I noticed the subtle rise and fall of her breathing, the gentle curve of her shoulders, the way her fingers rested on her lap as if waiting for a signal. Every small detail seemed magnified in the dim light, each movement a language all its own. Her eyes found mine, steady and searching, and I felt a jolt at the intensity of her gaze. There was something unspoken in it, acknowledgement of the connection, of the tension we had been cultivating since the night began. I wanted to speak, to bridge the gap between thought and expression, but the words lodged in my throat. Instead, I let my own eyes convey what I couldn't yet say aloud: curiosity, admiration, and a quiet desire for closeness. She shifted slightly, and the movement brought our knees closer, brushing lightly against each other. A shiver ran up my spine at the fleeting contact, and I realized that every accidental touch between us had become deliberate in my mind. My hand twitched almost imperceptibly, as though drawn toward hers, but I stopped myself, aware that the tension itself held a kind of beauty, fragile, electric, and intoxicating. Time seemed to stretch in that quiet, suspended moment. I noticed the warmth radiating from her, the soft scent of her hair brushing past my cheek as she leaned just slightly forward, the subtle brush of her sleeve against my arm. Each detail heightened the intimacy without a single word, a symphony of senses building a connection that felt deeper than anything I had experienced before. Finally, she let out a soft sigh, not of resignation but of acknowledgement. Our eyes met, lingering longer than either of us expected, and I understood, we were speaking in the language of subtle gestures, of silent confessions and shared breaths. Her hand rested near mine on the sofa, hovering just a fraction away, and I could feel the electricity of that near contact, the unspoken promise held within it. It was a peak of slow-burn tension, emotional and romantic, intimate yet entirely YouTube safe. The attraction was clear, the bond undeniable, yet restrained. In that moment of quiet, suspended time, I realized that the night had transformed us. What had begun as curiosity, admiration, and playful friction had now blossomed into something far more profound, a deep, mutual recognition, a connection poised on the edge of something entirely unforgettable. The night had carried us through laughter, shared stories, and quiet moments that felt suspended in time. By now, the playful debates, the whispered secrets, and the lingering touches had woven an invisible thread between us, delicate, unspoken, yet undeniable. It wasn't about urgency or physical attraction, it was about connection, trust, and a closeness that neither of us could ignore. As the clock ticked on, I realized it was late, yet neither of us seemed eager to leave the cocoon of warmth and quiet intimacy we had created. She moved toward the doorway, signaling that the night was winding down, and I instinctively rose to walk with her. There was a gentle ease in her steps, a rhythm I had subconsciously matched all evening. Then, almost naturally, she turned toward me and extended her arms. "Good night," she murmured, and I felt the invitation in the simple gesture, not just a farewell, but a recognition of everything that had passed between us tonight. Her arms slipped around my waist, pulling me close, and I felt the steady warmth of her body pressed lightly against mine. Her cheek rested softly against my chest, and I could hear the quiet rhythm of her heartbeat. For a moment, time seemed to pause, leaving only the two of us in the dim glow of the living room. The hug lingered, unhurried, filled with layers of emotion, trust, comfort, subtle desire, and a profound sense of understanding. Her hands rested lightly on my back, grounding me, and I realized how completely the evening had shifted my perspective, not just of her, but of myself. There was no awkwardness, no rush, just a quiet affirmation that this connection, built on slow-burn intimacy and shared vulnerability, was real. When we finally pulled back, our eyes met, lingering just a fraction longer than necessary. I could see the same mixture of warmth and reflection mirrored in her gaze. We smiled softly, a silent acknowledgement that this night had changed something fundamental. Nothing needed to be forced or explained, the bond was clear. As I stepped back toward the hallway, I could still feel the warmth of her embrace lingering in my chest, the subtle perfume that clung to the air, and the unspoken promise that what had begun tonight was only the start of something deeper. The age gap, the societal expectations, and the caution that had shadowed our interactions all melted away in the quiet honesty of this shared moment. By the time I left the apartment, the night felt complete, a slow-burn romance that had unfolded naturally, emotionally rich, and entirely satisfying. What had started as a casual visit had grown into a meaningful connection, one built on laughter, whispered confessions, lingering touches, and the kind of intimacy that leaves you changed in ways you didn't expect. And in that quiet aftermath, I knew, this was a story that had found its perfect, warm ending. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to follow and subscribe to the channel for more slow-burn romance stories like this.